that might be moderately fun. So today we're going to learn about conditioned defeat. Who's excited about that? None of you, because you've all been through this process of conditioned defeat, right? So we're going to talk about that. Just in case you had forgotten, you're all just a bunch of losers. And that, I mean that as honestly as possible and as supportively as possible. What's important about this, Abigail, is to think that we've all experienced some loss or setback, right, in an agonistic encounter. And whether that's been like an actual physical encounter with someone that we've lost, and I'm certain many of you have been in that situation, hopefully not in your adult lives, but possibly as children, like kids, they fight all the time, right? You've probably lost some of those. There have also been encounters that you've had, with that person at Starbucks that cut in front of you, or that time at the DMV, they told you to bring in 3 pieces of documentation, and you got there and you really needed 4, and you were trying to really like stare down, right? Those people, they just make stuff up. It's so fluid what happens at the DMV. I've gone in there for one thing, and I have to go back 5 times, and I go in there sometimes, and I don't have anything. I don't even have like ID on me. And they're like, sure, we'll give you a driver's license. That's fine. I don't know. It's like, you look like a guy that can drive. Here you go. So I don't know. It's completely different rules every time. But we want to think about conditioned defeat today. It's going to be a lot of fun. So who cares about losers? I love Google Images, right? So I just searched in loser, and about 3 rows down, this image came up. And I think it's taken out of context, and it looks far worse than it actually is. Because it looks pretty ridiculous. Like if you were going to go like, I'm searching for a loser, and you find this, bingo, we're going to put that in Webster's, right? That's clearly a loser. In fact, this is a picture from and in no way do I mean this as a slight on our military. It's just a funny picture. He's even got leg burn. Like, look at this. This is a picture from, I believe the photo credit was an Air Force base, and they were doing I think it was like a community-oriented Biggest Loser kind of thing. They were trying to get people active, but the photograph was just too sort of opportunistic for me not to share that. Because his concentration on that ball, I mean, it's like it's going to crush him. I don't know.
I don't know if it's mid-fall or if he's playing crab soccer.
I think it's crab soccer.
Okay.
That too.
Because I saw the other pictures,
Yeah.
and it's crab soccer.
Alright.
I promise you that. It is crab soccer, which I did not realize had a name.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or it was a thing like
They
that.
make you play it in like middle school.
And apparently also in middle age.
Yeah.
Because this guy and a whole bunch of other people were playing crab soccer. Very poor use of a racquetball court, I'm going to tell you that right now. If you're going into the racquetball court, just play racquetball. Don't make up crab soccer.
I mean, when we did it, we had like a much bigger ball, but teach his own.
Yeah. Teaches them what?
I mean, your choice of ball size.
It builds character.
Crab soccer. Anyway, so who cares about losers? No one. Just wanted to let you know that. And what I mean by no one is we have spent this whole semester talking about aggressive encounters, and we've primarily focused on the winners, right? And then there were those other people involved, or other crustaceans involved, or whatever, and they didn't really matter too much, right, Katie? We just kind of tossed them off to the side. There's actually not been much research focused on submission, right? There's been some work on defensive behaviors, okay? And defensive behaviors can sort of be related to this, but there's not been a lot of work on submissive behaviors. And you might think, well, what's the value of submissive behaviors? Hang in there, Elena. I have 6 slides today, so who knows? We may be here until tomorrow. So at the end, we're going to talk about what's the value of conditioned defeat? Why does this exist, right? And things don't exist, and this is just sort of an important overarching concept for you. Things don't exist in nature if they don't have value, okay? If something doesn't have value, and you possess that behavior or that genetic arrangement or that particular sort of whatever that is, you'll die. And then guess what? so will that problem, okay? So, nobody has done a lot of work on the losers. That's not a real flashy sort of like, man, I'm just going to spend my life studying losers. Nobody really wants to do that, right? So there we go. There are a couple things we need to know about before we get into this. And Tiffany, one of these things is called the HPA axis. That sounds really awesome, right? And it is. And the HPA is the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. Okay? HPA. So the hypothalamus is part of your brain. This guy dumps out a bunch of hormones of all kinds. And then it will tell your pituitary gland to dump out even other kinds of hormones, right? And then your pituitary gland will send that hormone into your bloodstream, and it'll go wherever it needs to go, and it'll cause the release, finally, I know this is like taking a long time, of a third set of hormones that will affect behavior or physiological function, okay? So we're going to start out with corticotropin releasing factor, CRF. That's going to be released by your hypothalamus. It's going to float over to your pituitary gland. And your pituitary gland is going to then release adrenocorticotropic hormone, abbreviated as ACTH. Now this will travel down, watch this, I'm going to draw a kidney. Because you got to have these little spouts in now. And then on top of that kidney, you've got this sort of like adrenal gland thing, right? So it's going to go down to your adrenal gland and cause your adrenal gland to release glucocorticoids and other such things, okay? Those stress hormones. 3-step process. This happens anytime you experience stress. It can be stress related to losing an agonistic encounter. It can be stress related to, final exams. Anybody getting stressed about those?
I've been stressed about my final papers.
Yeah, you got those things. How many of you are applying to graduate school? Anybody stressed about that? Haven't heard if you're getting in yet. Why are they not telling you? You ever think about these doubts creep in? It happens, Lauren. Don't worry about it. Try to rise above those, right? You try to be transcendent. So anyway, this is a 3-step process from your hypothalamus. It's going to release this. Your pituitary gland releases CRF, which causes ACTH to go to, your brain, hypothalamus releases CRF. Causes your pituitary to release ACTH, which goes to your adrenal gland, causes the release of stress hormones. Stress hormones have some severe long-term negative effects, okay? Bree, they raise your blood pressure, which is great in the short term, right? If you have to deal with a stressful situation and then move on. Long-term stress is bad because elevated blood pressure is going to be detrimental to your health. You have cardiovascular problems. These stress hormones also interfere with immune system functioning. So they're actually going to get in there and screw up the way that certain elements of your immune system work, right? So they can actually inhibit activity there. The other thing they do, and this is always a great one, they actually can kill brain cells in your hippocampus, which can affect your ability to store memories, right? So Elena, the next time you get worried about forgetting things, you probably just forgot something else. Because you got so worried that you got the stress hormones going up, they're killing your brain cells, and you're forgetting more things. So then you just get even more stressed about forgetting more things. It's this constant feedback loop. That's something to look forward to. Hang in there. So there you go. Try to stop stress where you can, right? You're not going to stop at all, but if you can mitigate, you're going to be good. So, you're out there, you're playing crab soccer, ball's coming at you, you're getting stressed, your team's down a goal, time's running out. What are you going to do? Hopefully you've got some stress hormones floating around. That's going to be awesome. It's going to increase blood flow, right? It's going to help break down stored nutrients so you can use that for energy at the moment. That's going to be great. And then you might win or you might lose, right? Kind of depends on what happens. Either way, the picture's going to end up on the internet. So, if we're going to study losers, we should really just study hamsters, right? So why should we study Syrian, and specifically Syrian hamsters? Because of all the hamsters, they're the best. Anybody ever own a hamster? Yeah. Did you ever make two of them fight? That doesn't sound like a lot of fun. So, this, for those of you that don't know, is a hamster. It is a rodent. We talked a lot about rodents in this class, right? And we're talking about crayfish. There's some interesting things about hamsters that make them particularly useful to study aggressive interactions. Okay? Interestingly, they're solitary, right? They don't really live in these large groups. Rats, you know, rats live in groups because you're constantly overrun by this like horde of rats, right? So watch out for that. So hamsters are solitary. What's also kind of interesting is females can defeat males. This is sort of unique in a lot of species, right? Now these are weight matched, males and females, but typically you don't see that kind of case. What's also interesting about hamsters is the females are also aggressive, right? In most species we had to have a whole sort of separate discussion about female aggression and estrogen receptors, right, and maternal aggression. In hamsters, Syrian hamsters, males and females both are aggressive. They will both respond aggressively to intruders, so we get the same sort of behaviors out of them, whether they're a male or a female. That's awesome. That kind of doubles up the number of samples you can collect, right? So that's kind of a cool thing. Again, they are aggressive. Because they're aggressive, and because of the way that they are aggressive, they don't really require any special conditions so that they can, that should be a K. Sometimes they attach onto intruders too, but to attack the intruders, right? So they don't require any sort of special setup. Okay? You can just put an intruder in the cage with the original hamster and they will fight. Okay? If you do that with rats, that doesn't always happen, right? You have to sort of create these situations. You may have to slightly food deprive the animals, right? You may have to place a female in there with one of the males before you put an intruding male to sort of initiate this sort of setup, right? So you have to sort of artificially heighten the situation for other species besides Syrian hamsters to attack intruders. But these guys are constantly ready. They're constantly on edge, just waiting for somebody to come through the door. And then they're going to try to like pounce on their heads, right? So that's exciting. On top of this, they're fairly easy to train and handle. Kind of small, pick them up. Quite often they don't have aggressive responses to human handling, so that's good. What I thought was interesting about a number of the studies that have supplied the information for this this topic and this discussion, they actually had to train. They had like aggressive hamsters that they trained as the aggressors, and then they had others that they trained as the submissive hamsters. So they would train them as these aggressive or intruder hamsters. Right? I can just imagine there's like this. I don't know. There's like this like training program to make your hamster aggressive, more aggressive, right? To make them an intruder, and like put them through some sort of like hamster boot camp. I don't know. I think about these things. It's like a hamster drill sergeant. It's like making them run or something. I don't know. Do hamster push-ups. I don't know if they could do push-ups. They drag the ground. So we'll see. I don't know, right? I mean, can they extend their arms? I mean, I don't know. Not too much on hamster muscular.
My hamster was like super strong and could climb the like wire side of his cage.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, that's cool.
So
Was he constantly like trying to fight something else?
And he was always trying to like kick the cage door open.
Oh, wow.
So I'd say yeah.
Yeah, there you go, right? Aggressive hamster. I don't think I ever had a hamster. I had some gerbils once. I had a baby rat. And my neighbor found it, died. Actually, all of those animals died. And that's probably not a shock, right? It was like a few years ago. I used to have a bunch of baby turtles. They died. I used to have some old turtles. They may still be alive. Because, turtles live decades, right? So that's possible. I had a turkey pigeon once. Yeah, this was a crazy one. You don't know what that is, dude. It's a show pigeon, actually. So I had a show pigeon. I didn't go out and like buy a show pigeon. I just came home one day when I was a kid and there was a pigeon on our porch. And it had like these like turkey feathers in the back. It was like purple with these like feathers sticking up in the back. Just like sitting there. I was like, well, I got a pigeon now.
It's probably somebody else's pigeon.
Should have put a collar on it. It was not a name tag. That was my pigeon. Actually, we had that pigeon for a while. Actually, we lived close to like a game farm where they would release like pheasants and quail and other such birds for hunters. So,
Nice.
yeah. So that I think that was part of that. There you go. Yeah, it was injured too, so it couldn't fly. So it just kind of like hopped around. Yeah. There you go. Nobody else has had a show pigeon, right, Katie? That's a new one. Brad, you're looking them up on the internet? You should. All right, Lauren, is this about show pigeons?
No, it's about hamsters.
Okay.
So, Syrian hamsters, do they sell those in like pet market stores? Okay. I'm just wondering, because like, they told me that the hamster I got was like super aggressive and like give it a while to get used to me. I didn't listen at all. And it like bit the hell out of my thumb. And ever since then,
I'm going to draw some teeth.
yeah. Killer front teeth.
Yeah, and this got these like sharp side teeth too. It's just got fangs all the way back. It's going to be in the sequel to Rampage with Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. It's going to be a giant hamster. That's what happens when you make a movie based on a video game that had no plot.
Yeah.
It was an awesome video game in like 1980, fill in the blank, when you couldn't really do anything else with a video game, but if you were like a giant gorilla, like punching people and pulling them out of their bathtub and eating them, that was exciting. I don't know how that made it into a movie. I don't know how somebody sold that script.
Well, here's my question. If you're gonna have
It's
him
about
in-
hamsters.
It's about their theory of him being in Rampage. So, if he's in Rampage, would he grow to the size of a dog? Or would he grow to the same size as the gorilla in them? Because he's really small.
Yeah, but the gorilla's bigger than the wolf, and the wolf,
True.
I think they all get giant.
Okay.
Solves that problem.
Yeah.
And then they play crab soccer.
Yeah.
All right. So we can train these guys, we can handle them, not a big deal. The other thing is, if you're gonna study conditioned defeat, you ought to be able to induce conditioned defeat in your species, right? Okay. And you can do this actually quite easily in these Syrian hamsters, maybe in as little as 15 minutes, which is pretty nice. Because if it took you like 5 days to induce conditioned defeat in a hamster, by then you're done, right? You're just like, wow, I'm just not doing this experiment anymore. That takes too long. So you can do these kind of short training sessions to induce conditioned defeat. It's just multiple sets of social defeat in a row, right? All right. Questions about hamsters? All right. Sorry. Brad, I think I ate something. I'm not sure what it was.
Did you just swallow a fly?
I swallowed a potato bug once. I don't think that's what this was.
I have cough drops. You want a cough?
I'm afraid that would choke me.
It'll be alright.
I also sometimes get esophageal spasms if I eat a bagel.
Are you allergic to bagel?
Well,
I don't eat many bagels because of that.
Only bagels.
Only bagels. Like nothing else really slows me down, but bagels, it's just like a traffic jam.
You just get to like the thick bread and the cream cheese and all that. It's too much.
I guess, I mean, I chew it an appropriate number of times. All right, so why should you expect to lose? And what do we mean by this? We're thinking again about social defeat, right? And so that means because these two animals, they've been in an encounter, one of them loses that encounter. That guy's the loser. We're not going to worry too much about the winner. The winner's going to go off and they're going to do their thing. And we know kind of the fun stuff that winners get to do. But let's talk about the fun stuff losers get to do. It's a short list. What's interesting about social defeat is if you do this sort of several times in a row, right? It can turn into what we call conditioned defeat. And that's really what we're thinking about here is conditioned defeat. We're not thinking about what happens that one time that you lost. But how does that loss, or a few losses in a row, how does that affect your approach to future encounters, right? That's really what we want to think about. How are you taking that information? Whatever, you're gathering from that loss. And then how are you applying that to your future encounters with either the same animal or a different animal, right? So what we know about these hamsters, which is kind of interesting, is that maybe one thing you might be thinking is, well, let's imagine we put a hamster in this situation. We have two hamsters. They're going to fight each other and one's going to lose. Okay? And then I'm going to take that loser. I'm going to put that loser somewhere else. And I'm going to bring in another hamster. Third hamster we would never know. And that loser, guess what it's going to do? It's going to run away. It's going to, have that kind of fleeing behavior. It might exhibit other submissive behaviors. In hamsters, fleeing is one of them. That's a pretty standard submissive behavior. There are other submissive behaviors. How many of you have a dog? How many of you have seen a dog? Just checking. Dogs, to signal submissiveness, will roll over and show you their stomachs and all their other parts, which is always nice, I guess, right? And because that's exposing sort of the vulnerable, side of their body, so they're saying like, hey, there's no need for you to try to attack me. You're in charge. So you should do that anytime, like in public. Like if you're, you should just get down and roll over on your back and show people your stomach if you're gonna tell them hey, you win. If you don't want to fight somebody. I don't think that would work. I'm imagining somebody trying to mug you, and then you just rolling over on your back and pulling up your shirt, go hey, look, I'm not gonna do anything. Although that might really weird out the person who was mugging you, so they may leave you alone, right? Nobody's gonna try that. No, nobody thinks of these things. It's worth a shot. So, social defeat. In the future, they will run from a new, smaller, non-aggressive hamster, right? Even if you just put a hamster in there, this doesn't even have to be an aggressive hamster. Abigail, we had the first hamster. He's afraid, he's been beaten, we're gonna put him in his cage. This is not, interestingly, where that initial loss was. That initial loss was in a neutral cage, okay? It's in a neutral cage, third-party location. You got defeated. We're going to put you back in your home cage. You should feel more comfortable there, right? Because that's where you belong. That's your home cage. We can take a smaller, non-aggressive hamster that you've never seen before, drop that guy down in there with you, and you will run away from him. That's amazing. And this can happen for up to 30 days. Which, how long does a hamster live? Anybody know?
My house, not very
2
long.
years.
2 squeezes. No, 2 years. 2 years is about the lifespan of a hamster. So if you think about 30 days, like I mean, that's a significant proportion of their life, right? If they're only going to live 24 months, and one of those, that's like 1 out of 24, right?
Yeah.
So that's actually a pretty high percentage, okay? They're going to be afraid of these other sort of hamsters.
So is this like taking the same hamster out and then putting him back in, or leaving the hamster in there?
So we have 2 hamsters.
Right.
They're in a neutral cage. They live somewhere else. We're going to pull them both out and put them in a cage together. One's going to lose, one's going to win. We don't really care what happens to the winner. The loser we're going to put back in his home cage. Then we're going to bring a third, smaller, non-aggressive hamster into that home cage. And even it's smaller, it's non-aggressive, and it's coming at your own territory. 3 things that should make you likely to be aggressive, right? Because if it's smaller, you can beat it up. If it's not aggressive, you can just go ahead and, right? Because you're going to catch it unaware, and if it's invading your territory, right? These are all 3 things that under normal circumstances, a Syrian hamster would attack. Okay? But because we've induced conditioned defeat, that hamster that would normally win that encounter will flee and run away for up to an entire month later. Yeah, that's pretty amazing, right? Now, what's really sort of interesting about this, you might think like, well, that doesn't mean anything, right? It's just... But they will actually have slightly different behavior toward hamsters that have beaten them. So if you do sort of house them in a situation where they can interact with each other, right? And so they can kind of have this interaction, they will avoid that hamster that's beaten them for up to 7 days. Okay? So this is different than that social defeat, right, or conditioned defeat. Okay? So they will try to avoid hamsters that have beaten them. They won't necessarily avoid other hamsters. But if you put them in a situation in that sort of intruder model, then they'll run away.
But you never take the hamsters out of the cage. You leave them in the cage the entire time. You don't take them out for a couple hours. You just leave them in the cage, right? You don't like take them out and put them in separate, and then the next day put them in the same thing again. Does that make any sense?
I'm going to say no.
Do you mean like if they're living in the same cage versus living in different cages and then putting them in the same cage for a
Like
day?
you want to see their behaviors.
Right.
So today we're going to take both of these hamsters. We're going to put them in there. We're going to see whatever. Okay.
Right.
Well then, after a while, they haven't had any aggressive behavior. Do you take them out and then the next day come back and put them in the same cage again to see if they attack? Or do you just leave them in there for, we'll say, you just leave them in the same cage for 30 days, we'll say.
Yeah, you
You're
don't
not
have,
taking them at all. You're not putting them anywhere else.
right. You do have to leave them in there for a period of time.
Okay.
For them to have their, and then you can just pull them out.
Okay.
Hamsters are pretty aggressive in general toward other hamsters, so unless you've done something to one or both of the hamsters ahead of time, they're done. You're not going to have to wait long to have
Like
them.
I've always noticed, because I've had hamsters before, but I noticed like every time that you try to like reach in, they would get like aggressive and try to bite you.
Yeah.
Every time that you put your hand in, they would get more
Yeah.
aggressive.
They make
That's
love
why
to
mine
that.
ended up in an ice bucket, was going to the mall whenever it was a pet store.
Ah, there you go. Hamsters. They're not the greatest pet, really.
No.
You should get your kids something like a turtle. They don't bite. I mean, the snapping ones do. Gotta watch those. So, conditioned defeat. Multiple social defeats in a row. You will run away from someone that you should be able to defeat under normal circumstances, right? So you're going to run away from that. Even if you're in your home cage where you know you're comfortable, where you know you have sort of an advantage. You've got a size advantage here, you've got home territory advantage here, but you're still going to flee, right? And that's what we call conditioned defeat. That's what's important. All right, questions about that concept? All right, I think we got it. I don't know how I found a picture of a hamster ball derby, but I did. And this guy apparently did not do, well, I mean, says he's a winner. He got a $10 Petco gift card, which is pretty nice. I'm not entirely sure how this works. If this was a race, if this was more of like a, I don't know, demolition derby where you try to like push them off the edge of some table. I don't really know how this works, so I didn't look up the rules. Just like crab soccer, I don't know. Okay? But we do want to think a little bit about the brain regions that are involved in conditioned defeat, right? And to do that, we need to step back a moment, and we need, because unfortunately, folks have not spent a lot of time looking at the brain regions for conditioned defeat. Okay, we've looked at brain regions that are involved in other things, right? That are related to conditioned defeat. So we'll think about those a bit. And the first thing we want to think about is just emotions in general, right? How many of you have ever experienced an emotion? Okay, I'm going to assume most of you have. There's maybe a small percentage of you who haven't, right? That does happen occasionally. It does, right? So we should acknowledge that and move on. In order for you to feel emotions, there's one part of your brain that probably needs to be active, and that's the amygdala. In particular, the amygdala is going to be involved in fear-related behaviors, right? This guy's really important. Not just the amygdala, which has sort of three parts. There's another region called the BNST. I'm not going to expect you to memorize what those letters stand for. Okay. It's the bed nucleus of the stria terminalis. That's why I don't expect you to remember it, right? Okay. So it's the BNST. That's really sort of part of what we might consider an extended amygdala, right? So you have the amygdala and the BNST. They're highly connected to each other, and they're also highly connected to many of the same brain regions. Okay? So, the amygdala is going to get information from most of your sensory systems, right? It's going to integrate that information with your previous experiences. Okay, so it's going to tap into your memories. That's going to be important because it needs to let you know, should I be afraid of this or not? Now, how many of you think it's important to be afraid of things? Yeah, Dina, you got your hand up really fast there. Yeah. Being afraid is a great survival mechanism, right? So let's imagine you live somewhere where there are, I don't know, large cats, right? Like lions or tigers. Should you go up and try to pet one of those? Probably doesn't sound like a great idea, right? You would? Yeah. Then we would be calling you like one arm, because that's what happens. They will bite limbs off of you. I've seen it happen. There's a YouTube video.
Worth it.
Guess, right? So, fear is actually a good mechanism for survival, right? There are things you should be afraid of, okay? That keeps you alive. So it's great to have that brain mechanism working, right? And so I want you to keep this in mind as we think about why might we go through sort of this conditioned defeat after multiple social losses, right? Okay. But we can actually induce this, and we've talked a bit about this. I believe we've talked about this in this class. Conditioned fear, right? Have we talked about that? Anybody remember? Nobody cares. I'll talk about it again if we already did. The basic idea with conditioned fear, and there's been a ton of work on conditioned fear, is you can make someone really afraid of anything, right? If you think that is a predictor of a negative outcome, right? And that's really what fear boils down to, right? Why are you afraid? How many of you are afraid of snakes? It's a pretty common fear, right? Why are you afraid of snakes? Because you think they'll kill you, right? Even those little green snakes that are like this big, for some reason you think it's going to kill you, right? Okay. Now, some snakes will kill you. None of them are probably near you, so you don't have to worry about it. but you're afraid of things because they predict some negative outcome, right? Okay. And you can do this. This is a pretty standard approach to, conditioning. You can do this with rats. Make a noise, ring a bell, and then shock the rat. That sounds like an unpleasant experience, right? How many of you don't answer, love being shocked? There's like somebody's going to go like, oh yeah, I'm really into that, and I just don't want to go. And no one else in the class does either. So, most people don't like being shocked. Most animals don't like being shocked. It's a painful experience. If every time you heard a bell ring, you knew you were going to get shocked, whenever you hear that bell, you would kind of prepare for that, right? So you would have that fear response. We can do this. We can train animals for this. Nearly every species of animal can display conditioned fear, even sea slugs. And I know this because a guy won a Nobel Prize for teaching sea slugs how to be afraid of things. So that happened. His name was Eric Kandel. I met Eric Kandel once. He was a nice guy. The guy who interviewed him was got in a lot of trouble for plagiarism later. Jonah Lehrer, I believe was his name. Anyway, so yeah, Eric Kandel was an interesting guy. His family had to flee Austria when the Nazis invaded, and so but he studied memory largely in sea slugs, and he did a lot of other great things, obviously, as well, scientifically. But I saw him when he wrote a memoir. He was like plugging his book, and it was about memory, actually. He like remembered this red airplane toy that he had, and when his family had to flee his home. So anyway, there you go. There's an Eric Kandel story for you. Now you have one. You can share with your friends at dinner. I don't know, Lauren, if you're like at dinner and you're always like looking for good anecdotes to add to the conversation. There you go. There's one. So conditioned fear, we can train you or any other animal to be afraid of essentially anything, right? How many of you remember Little Albert? That's like the classic thing, right? Just Little Albert. That little guy was afraid of like rabbits. I mean, I don't know, whatever, right? That's kind of the same idea, right? You could make people afraid of their cell phones. If every time you gave them their cell phone, it shocked them. I think about this sometimes. Like as a parent, like what if you wanted your kid to stop using their cell phone? You give them a fancy case that shocks them after they used it for so long. So if they were, then they might stop using their phones. You guys think about those things? No, I do. How many of you have a roommate who uses your stuff? Yeah, right? You could just wire some electrical lines up to it, shock them a little bit the next time they touch it. You do that a few times, they'll leave your stuff alone.
Like the same stuff that's in those shock pins. I'm talking about
Yeah, just do that, right?
Yeah.
Have at it. I like something a little more powerful, like a car battery, but whatever. I don't like to spend a lot of time on this process. Finish it off quickly. So conditioned fear, we know that conditioned fear relies heavily upon the amygdala and the BNST. And if you destroy these nuclei, the ability of that animal to learn to be afraid of something is gone, right? This happens in humans. Humans who don't have an amygdala have no sort of fear, right? They have no fear responses. They don't even have fear-related or emotionally related memories, which is kind of interesting, right? So when there's a study in Japan a number of years ago, some of you have heard me talk about this in my other classes. They had some earthquakes, and they would ask people, like, hey, tell me about the time you were in that earthquake. And if you've ever lived through an earthquake, you will, and it was a substantial earthquake, you will obviously have been afraid during that. That's a perfectly reasonable response, right? But if you ask individuals who, for one reason or another, have had damage to their amygdala or their amygdala has been lesioned completely, they'll say things like, yeah, I was eating a turkey sandwich, a picture fell off the wall, I couldn't watch my TV, I don't know what was going on. they're not like terribly upset about it. They can recall all of the events, but they're not adding any emotional content to it. So this amygdala is really important for,
So does
again.
that mean they don't get traumatized?
Yeah. How could they? They can't. If you don't have an amygdala, you will never develop PTSD.
Well, there's also like physical responses to trauma, and they don't have those either. That's
They're
possible.
just going to sit there and eat the whole time. You could shoot them in the leg. That's going to hurt. They're going to feel pain. It's not like they're going to like, oh, geez, my leg. But they're going to go like, oh, geez, my leg. I should probably go to the hospital because I've been shot. They're not going to be afraid of that.
Would they would still have like physiological responses to stress, they just couldn't appraise them.
Right. Their heart rate will still
Right.
accelerate, but they're not going to have any sort of,
Reaction.
yeah, they're not going to have any sort of ability to learn that that was like a bad thing or connect that to any sort of negative experience, really.
So would that make them more risk takers?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it actually would, which is a problem, because there's. Well, I didn't really want to talk about like hypersexualized monkeys today, but I guess we will. So there are, Lauren, it's your fault.
I'm sorry.
That you're taking us down that road, right? I was really trying to avoid that as much as possible. But there are syndromes that, and they're studied a lot in monkeys and in humans who don't have a lot of it happens when you have your temporal lobes removed, which is not like an elective surgery. It's probably because you have temporal lobe epilepsy, right? And they're not able to control them, so they'll remove parts of your temporal lobe, which would include your amygdala. And when you do this, you see individuals, they will typically become, and it has to be bilateral, that's slightly more. But they'll become hypersexualized, they'll become aggressive, they don't really seem to comprehend negative consequences to things, right? Because they're not sort of getting that fear response. They're not really getting a handle on that, so they'll just kind of do whatever. So there you go. That was sort of an exciting story, right? Anybody thrilled by that? No.
So when you have temporal lobe epilepsy and they remove part of your temporal lobe, they remove your amygdala too? Is that what you're saying?
Sometimes. It depends on where the locus of the...
Seizures happen?
Yeah. They're obviously not going... They're going to remove as little tissue as possible,
Yeah.
but quite often...
So is it dead tissue?
No.
No, it's still, okay.
Yeah. That's why you lose... I mean, that's why afterwards you would have problems with particular functions. That's how many of you remember HM, the patient HM? Anybody heard of him? He had the memory problems. He was an individual who had temporal lobe epilepsy, but when they had to remove his parts of his brain, they actually removed his hippocampus as well.
Well, that's why I was curious, because my boyfriend has temporal lobe epilepsy, and they were talking about that.
Yeah, I mean, that's, try other things first.
Yeah.
And then, but temporal lobe epilepsy in particular is sort of difficult to control with other therapeutic interventions.
Yeah, we also discovered that alcohol is a contributing factor.
Alcohol does a lot of things, and that can cause some problems too. Yeah, you're increasing inhibition sometimes on things that are inhibiting. So you're like inhibiting inhibitors.
So
And
with
things just
the,
excited all the time.
like an intrasite, I don't know how many times I've heard the story about the guy who had the train spike in his head and like lived through it. And
Yeah, Phineas Gage.
Yeah, so like is that what happened to him? His
No.
amygdala? Okay.
No, he blew out his frontal cortex.
Okay, cool.
Which is related to this whole circuit, right? Your frontal cortex typically tells your amygdala, like, hey, shut up, you're okay.
Yeah.
And so when you lose your frontal cortex, you lose sort of your ability to analyze social situations. You start doing weird things. It's this process called extinction, where, so that's kind of I didn't really intend to talk about extinction much, but we will. Since you brought it up again, Lauren, it's your fault. Once you have, and so it's, how many of you live in an environment that changes? Yeah, so because you live in an environment that changes, it's important to be able to adjust the things to which you're afraid, right? And so you want to constantly be kind of changing things that you're afraid of. as that becomes more or less important, right? So sometimes that bell is a great predictor of being shocked, but if I start ringing that bell constantly and I never shock you, then you go like, I don't need to get worked up about this bell, I'm not going to get shocked, but man, that blue light now, every time I see it, I get shocked, so you need to kind of shift your focus there. You don't forget these things, like you never move past, right? And so if for some reason I were to come back and like ring that bell and then shock you, your response would jump right back up to the way it was, like after you had been exposed to that bell and that shock for an extended period of time. So it's not that you're forgetting things or unlearning things, you're simply changing the weight, that predictive value, right? Which is important. And some species are better at that than others. There's this really nice sort of trade-off you can think about, Bree, about whether or not you should be a species that relies more on what we call instinct or one that relies more on learning. And a lot of that's related to the variability of your environment, right, over time. As a species that we're rather long-lived in the world of animals, right? Considering that how long does a hamster live? 2 years. Brad's our hamster expert. How long should a human live? Probably about 35 years. And the reason I say that is if you don't brush your teeth, which I don't recommend, I do recommend brushing your teeth, just as a heads up, right? In case you haven't been doing that, you should probably start. But if you don't brush your teeth, at about 35 or so, your teeth will all fall out. Like that's about the limit for like no dental care at all. And in other species like tigers, guess what happens when their teeth fall out?
They die.
Yeah, they die, right? So, kind of using that logic to humans, once your teeth fall out, you should die.
Right.
So, but even at that, even at 35 years, like if that's the compare that to the life of a butterfly. How long does a butterfly live? Like 8 minutes. They live like a very short period of time, right? I mean, have a very short lifespan. Hamsters, even a mammal, right? Even mammals tend to be longer lived than some other species. The only species that live longer are some of your crocodile, alligators, and like turtles, right? So.
Butterflies live for 12 months.
12 months.
Yep.
There you go. It's not very long.
No.
Considering humans, I mean, right now, what's the life expectancy? Anybody know? Anybody ever calculate your life expectancy? You should. And the reason you should is because at some point you're going to want to retire. And you're going to want to plan for that, right? And I know, like, this is like side story moment to millennials because how many of you are millennials? Yeah, like all of you, right? Okay. That includes me, unfortunately. I slid in, Dina, by about 18 months on being a millennial, which I would much rather be that than the Gen X people, because they're all turds. And that's largely the reason you guys are having to deal with a whole lot of problems, is they didn't fix any and they made more. So that's like a true story, right, Brad? So,
Yeah, I'm not complaining.
you're not going to, I mean, that's their problem.
Yeah.
So you can't trust those people. And then those, like, baby boomers, I mean, it wasn't their fault there was too many of them, but then they just kept making too many of them, and then that was a problem too, right? So you guys are doing a great job. You're already putting the napkin industry out of business, apparently, right? I read this article. It was like in Forbes or Business Insider. Like, which, I mean, I've seen some of your faces. You don't wipe them, I know. Like, that's a true story. So now everybody's like, I've already talked about, like, brushing your teeth. So everybody's like, afraid to smile. And then I talked about, like, not wiping your faces. Like, look at your sleeves, they're all dirty. The point is, where was I going with this, Brad? Because I lost this point.
Millennials killing industries.
Yeah, so I was trying to tell you to plan for your futures and retire, right? Like save money for retirement, which I know you're not doing, right? And as a generation, millennials aren't doing this, okay? And I know this as one of those older millennials, like who's learned a couple lessons from the people older than me, like save money, right? Don't blow it all on things, because you're going to live a long time, unfortunately, right? You're going to live a really long time, unfortunately. So you're going to have to deal with yourself for, geez, another 70 years probably. That's a long time, right? If you think about that, AJ, you're like, man, 70 years I got to put up with this guy? And that's you pointing at you, not me. I've got 10 less years than that, I think, right? I got another like 60 years I got to put up with this guy. So I did a life expectancy calculator from the Wharton School of Business, which you would wonder like why the Wharton School of Business, but if you're financial planning, I think they're pretty good. So I know when I'm going to die, and I'm ready for it. I got plenty of time to plan. That doesn't mean I'm not saving money though. So save your money, because you're gonna, I mean, everybody, like, when do you want to retire? Like, everybody's like, oh, 65, retirement age. No. One, you're gonna have to work about 15 more years. And two, you're gonna live about, who knows how many more past that, right? That's only gonna get you to 80. You're probably gonna live another 15 or 20 years. You guys don't think about these things, dude. I can tell, because I can see it on your faces. You're like, I'm gonna be 90? Like someday, 90? It's gonna happen to some of you. I mean, some of you I know, it's not. Something's gonna get you before then, I promise. It's gonna be your own fault.
Like a hamster.
Like a hamster, you're gonna try to wrestle a hamster. These aggressive hamsters.
A tragic crab soccer accident.
I feel like he's so exposed here. Like there's no way to protect yourself in the event of like a real striker. You know what I mean? I mean, it's just. I'm just thinking, now I'm thinking about like what if like Pele and Beckham or something were like playing this like mystical game of crab soccer, like how would that turn out? You guys don't know Pele, right? You guys know Beckham, but you know he used to play soccer. Just as a heads up.
Yeah.
That's how he got famous,
Yeah.
right? Like he did something first.
Yeah.
And then now he sort of exists as this social phenomenon.
Married a Spice Girl.
Yeah, he did that too. Again, I think the soccer got it better.
Yeah.
Not that, I mean, but I think the soccer gets you to meeting Spice Girls, right?
Yeah.
Like I think about that sometimes. Like if you're a non-famous person, how do you meet a famous person? You don't.
You either got money or you got some good looks.
Yeah, but I think there are like a lot of good-looking people walking around that never like make it up there to like meet other like famous good-looking people. I don't know. I think about those things sometimes. All right. Conditioned fear. Any questions about that? Did we cover that pretty well? It was a little more than I meant to, but that's fine. I've only got 2 more slides, so we'll be finished in a couple hours. All right. Anybody ever been to a hamster ball derby? You have? Really? Are there rules?
What it is like a race, and they have like 4 tracks that's made out of pipes, and then they put the ball whichever hamster gets that ball first. My hamster won 3 times in a row.
Yours did? Wow, what was its name?
Jerry.
That's not a terribly creative name for a hamster, but it works. Wow. Did you like feed it? I mean, did you do like blood doping, or how did you?
No, it was a very energetic hamster.
There you go, folks. Anybody needs to have their hamster trained, he's got a great program for you.
I mean, if you look at the picture you chose, if this was a person who legitimately won, they named their hamster Hamster, for one.
Hamstar.
Hamstar.
Hamstar, by the way. Hamstar. Which I think.
Or it could be an advertisement for Petco and their hamster halter.
Yeah, I don't know, and I don't know. Do they let other species in, or does it have to be a hamster?
It's any kind of like rodents, hamsters, rats, guinea pigs, and stuff like
Guinea
that.
pigs? I felt like guinea pigs would be too slow. They're too heavy.
I don't think you can put guinea
They would be
pigs.
good in a strength
They're all
competition.
in different tiers, but they don't progress each other.
Oh, there's like classes to
That's
this.
hamster.
All right. Well, there you go. We've all learned something today. I unfortunately think most of it was about hamster races, and not the important parts I wanted to tell you, but that's okay. So, conditioned fear. Did anybody need any other questions about that? Is that sort of an important concept? Okay. Hey, why did I ask you about like conditioned fear and memory? Because we're going to talk about that a little bit. Do you remember that time you lost? So as a group project, we're all going to go around and tell about our worst defeat ever. No, nobody's gonna share that. Mine was in the 6th grade. I came in 3rd place in a design an anti-drug poster. It's brilliant. I got a $5 Walmart gift certificate that I had to split with the person who worked on the poster with me. So I got like $2.50. It's a true story.
Did you buy?
I have no idea. For $2.50, you don't get much. It's like a pack of juicy fruit. The whole point of conditioned defeat is that it has happened, social defeat has happened multiple times, and that has set you up, right, for this sort of future approach to antagonistic encounters, okay? We're not thinking about that one time when you get in the middle of a fight, what happens? That's not important to us when we think about conditioned defeat, right? The outcome is important only in the sense that we're going to use that outcome over time to kind of like stack them together. So you have to be able to remember that we lost, right? And what are some things that are involved in this sort of memory process, right? Involved with anything, but particularly when we think about aggression. We like to use this term called long-term potentiation. Okay? And if you think about this, long-term in the sense of this hamster, we're thinking about 30 days, right? I mean, that's a fairly extended period of time that this sort of memory of those losses is hanging with this hamster, right? So for 30 days, it's sort of just like wallowing around in self-pity, right? I think about that. But long-term potentiation, I don't expect you to understand the really deep mechanisms of this for this class, but we need to have a basic idea, is the process of strengthening connections, right? Between different neurons, different brain cells, okay? So we can strengthen connections between the cells that recognize a stimulus and the one that recalls a defeat, right? So if you think about, you saw a hamster, that hamster beat you, say 2 or 3 times you lost. Now the next time you see a hamster, even if it's a smaller hamster, you're going to run away from it because that hamster triggers that memory, right, of you being defeated, and you don't want to go through that process again. So because you don't want to go through the process of defeat, what are you going to do? You're going to flee. You're going to display submissive behaviors, right, whatever those are for your species. And they vary from species to species. So this is a very important process. Those of you that have taken my physio class, you know at this point in the lecture I have to mention Donald Hebb because he's the guy who came up with sort of this long-term potentiation idea. What's amazing about this, Dina, is he developed this idea in the 1940s with absolutely no understanding or no evidence to support the cellular mechanisms he was describing. And he was a psychologist, actually. He was the president of the American Psychological Association for a while. You guys ever heard of the APA? Yeah. Yeah, you're really going to hear the APA, everyone except Dina. When you write your projects up for this, because everybody else are psych majors, right? Except Bree, who is some other kind of major that I can't remember. I don't think she's going to tell us right now. So, the rest of you need to know about APA, because you're going to use APA first, right? If you're not a psych major, you don't have to do that, that's fine. But Meredith, the American Psychological Association, major organization for people studying psychology, people who are practicing psychologists, right? And that's the way that goes. Donald Hebb, back in the 1940s, he delivered a speech, and the title of that was Psychology as a Biological Discipline, right? It was just really fascinating. And he had these ideas, and he was basically telling all of the psychologists back in the late 40s, like, hey, idiots, you should study biology because it's about brains. And then, for some reason, not everybody listened to Hebb, and they still don't, which really bothers me. And I'm sure it bothers, not him, because he's dead, but I'm sure it bothers other Hebbians.
It's a good word.
Hebbites. We call it Hebbian plasticity, so I think they're Hebbians, right?
Yeah.
If they follow the teachings of Hebb. It's a weird way to phrase that, right, Montana? You ever think about like that, like you're a Hebbian, like if you're, I don't know. That's sort of unique only to like psychology. Like people are Freudians or Jungians or whateverians. I don't know. I mean, get outside of that, and people don't really like associate with the theory. People in other fields just try to look at evidence and see how that explains the world, not make up explanations before they do any work. So that's a big difference there. So keep an eye on that. Yeah. They're almost as bad as those philosophers. I don't mean to like knock on Descartes, because I know is he like a national hero in France?
Who?
Descartes, René Descartes.
Well, yeah, actually, yeah.
I mean, he should be, because he's done a lot of good stuff.
Yeah.
I hear he's doing a lot of great things these days.
He also was wrong.
Yeah, he also was wrong, like big time, right? Like on a lot of stuff. He's like, oh, your brain just like squishes and arms move, and that's not really how it works. So yeah, he was completely wrong. But you have to be wrong sometimes to get other people to be right.
Okay, why not?
Yeah, why not, right? My favorite Descartes story is how he died because he got up early. I love that. I love that. That's why I only teach evening classes. So I'm definitely not going to die. The Wharton School of Business has already told me I have a 75% chance to live to be over 96. That's not bad, right? Watch out. Your grandkids are going to be listening to me if you send them to Marshall. If you have any grandkids, which I hope you don't.
What do you do when you hit that point, though?
What point?
Like as a professor or teacher, when you have your students' kids?
I'm going to be so old I don't remember.
Okay.
Huh? I'm not worried about it. Actually, I mean, that actually may happen. I'm probably going to move into another, I'm going to do something else by then. Yeah.
What if we still have one of our kids as like a student though? If they just happen to go to like whatever school you teach at.
Yeah. Let's have to keep moving.
It'd have to be somebody. It'd have to be somebody like really memorable, someone that got on your nerves, and you'd be like, God, you remind me of this one student I had.
Yeah, there are a few of those. I keep a list. I used to teach human anatomy and physiology to nursing students, and I kept a list. Like, I kept a mental list of like, if I'm in an ambulance and they drop me off at a hospital and I see that student, I'm going to tell them to drive me to the next one, and I will take my chances because I know. I'm going to be better off just trying to operate on myself. Let this person even like take my blood pressure. I still have that list. What's really problematic in this area, right, is like at some point I know you guys are going to give me a mental health issue. But the problem is you're all going to go into mental health like treatment in this area. So I wonder, like, sometimes, am I going to go to the person who created my problem? You guys don't think about that, but I do. Right? It's true, though, right? You can't get away from it. And I get a lot of students who go to med school, and they go to med school here, and then they get jobs like at Marshall Health, and I'm thinking, wait a minute. I mean, I'm not in any way denigrating our programs at all. We have phenomenal programs here, and some phenomenal students. It just creates a weird situation, right?
Yeah.
When I go into the doctor and I'm like, hey, I got this weird lump somewhere, you care to take a look at it? And I'm like, remember that time you wrote that weird paper? Anyway, so long-term potentiation is important. It actually involves this thing called an NMDA receptor. That's an N-methyl-D-aspartate receptor. I'm not expecting you to remember that part, okay? But the NMDA part I do expect you to remember. NMDA receptors are involved in long-term potentiation. They're involved in the creation of memories, right? And that's how this works. If you put in what we call an antagonist, and this is something that just decreases NMDA activity, what happens, Elena, is you can block conditioned defeat. Okay? You're not blocking the response to that instance, to that fight, right? You're not blocking their fear response. You're not blocking their stress response. That still happens. You're just preventing them from having that sort of stacking effect, right? So you're preventing them from remembering like, hey, I got beat up the last time, and I got beat up the time before that, and I got beat up the time before that. The next time I see a hamster rolling on my back and I'm scooting out of here, okay? You're blocking that effect, right? Because you're blocking that memory. You're not blocking the fear response. That still happens, okay? Because those are sort of these other mechanisms that are involved. You're just preventing the sort of that memory of that, right? Does that make sense, Meredith? It's pretty cool, right? Hey, anybody know an NMDA antagonist? Ketamine? Anybody ever, you don't have to answer that if you've ever used ketamine. Katie, for some reason you got a really weird look on your face. And I thought, like, I don't think Katie probably has used ketamine, unless you were like at a vet one time and like missed and stabbed yourself, because they do use it as an anesthetic at veterinary hospitals and so forth. But that's really the main use for ketamine, legally. There's an illegal use for ketamine as a date rape drug, right? Have we talked about ketamine in this class?
Not in here.
No, not in here. Okay, so some of you haven't heard about ketamine. You should watch for it because it's a dissociative anesthetic, right? So it's not that you're going to be like completely unconscious. You're just not going to remember what happened to you, right? And if you think about that, that's really what's happening, what we're saying here. If you give someone an NMDA antagonist, not ketamine, but there are other NMDA antagonists, they're not going to be unconscious, right? They're not going to be out of it and just like have no idea they're in the middle of an antagonistic encounter. They're just not going to be able to remember, like, the next time around that they should be afraid because they lost. Okay? Ketamine is, again, mostly used in veterinary applications. There are some, like, battlefield applications as well. Lily, you asked earlier about folks with trauma, and I mentioned PTSD, right? If you give someone ketamine, like after a traumatic event, they're going to be less likely to develop PTSD.
Right after, or at the end of it, or do
Well,
you have like a certain period of time?
Yeah, so that's actually a really interesting question that I'm going to have to answer with Tetris.
Okay.
So there was a study a few years ago where they made people watch these videos of like fatal crashes and amputations, right? So that seems pretty gross. And you can imagine if you watched that for like 12 minutes, for some extended period of time, you'd have these like sort of recurring visualizations of that, right? How many of you have ever seen a movie and then like later, like that scene popped into your head, right? And you thought, well, man, that was awesome, right? I'm gonna try that. I know that happened after everybody saw Black Panther, right? You just walk around like trying to challenge people for command and try to jump into cars while they're driving. I don't recommend you do those things.
Put on like a human cat suit and just jump on people.
That'll get you arrested.
Yeah.
I know that for a fact, actually. So, but there's no tail, right?
No,
Yeah,
it's not aerodynamic.
I guess. So, anyway, Lily, if you make people watch this video and then you ask them, like, immediately afterward or sort of sometime afterward, and then for like the next 6 weeks, they'll like write down all the recurring sort of visualizations they've had, right? And they can write this down, that's cool. If within 30 minutes of showing them that video, you let them play Tetris for 10 minutes, I say let, but make them. But you know, like Tetris, like you don't have to make people play Tetris, it just happens, right? If you're like, hey, here's Tetris, people start. It's just how it goes. That's why it's been such a great game since 1980 when the Russians invented it. Believe it, Tetris is, right, okay, Lauren's with me on this. So you gotta watch that. But the point is, 10 minutes of Tetris will prevent them from like having as many of these recurring sort of visualizations, right? And so you can think about that as like flashbacks and sort of blocking that. But what you're doing is you're competing with those like visual-spatial sort of resources, and so you're not able to encode those memories as well, right? And so anything we can do to sort of disrupt that NMDA process will prevent you from developing these sort of memories of traumatic events, or any event in particular, you know. So you can watch a really bad movie and then give someone a shot of ketamine and then they'll forget it. So I think about that, Abigail. I've seen some movies, I was like, jeez.
Wasn't worth your time.
No, I saw that movie Suicide Squad.
I heard it was bad.
It was, and the only reason I watched it is because at the time I had an HBO subscription because I was watching Game of Thrones, which I have let lapse until, actually, until Westworld comes back later this month, and then I have to like subscribe again because I'm excited about that. And I was like, okay, well it's like not costing me any extra, so I'm gonna watch it. And I was like, man, that was rough. And I was like, I couldn't even tell you what the movie was about. Like I don't even know what the plot was. And then Margot Robbie keeps like winning all of these awards now, and she's like getting recognition for being a great actor and like writer director kind of thing. And I'm like, whoever wrote and directed that movie must have just been like a third grader, because there was like no performance worthwhile in that film. And for her to go on, I mean, it almost makes me want to watch I, Tonya, just because of like I like to see what she could do with a competent writer and director.
Wait, so would the Tetris work even if it's a severely traumatic event?
I don't know.
Or just like scary, creepy movies?
It's not gonna hurt. Tetris never hurts. I don't know. They didn't really do much more than that. That was sort of the end of that study. It's kind of hard to like actually like go up and bludgeon people and then ask them to play Tetris. You know, like, I mean, you're thinking about these like experimental design things, right? Like you're not getting that past there. I mean, I'm surprised they got the other, like, let's make you watch a video of a guy getting his arm chopped off. Like that was probably hard enough to get past the IRB, right? It was like the screening for that to get the participants had to be pretty high, because you don't just want
I was
anybody
thinking
off the
like
street.
you'd get somebody who had already just experienced the trauma and then get some of them to play Tetris after.
Yeah, well that's why they did 30 minutes. So like, how many of you work at a hospital? Yeah, you should just, like when people come in the ER, I don't know if you work in the ER, but you should just have all your ER colleagues like give them Tetris to play. Because the reason they did like a 30-minute window was because the average wait in a hospital ER is about 30 minutes.
I work in surgery. We do give them ketamine.
You do give them ketamine?
Yeah.
That's fun. Yeah, wow. There you go.
It's not, used a whole lot.
Right.
Very, very, very seldom, mostly for older people because they can't tolerate it.
Absolutely. Yeah, there are some rare applications where ketamine is a great choice, but for the most part.
But usually those people that come in and they're that old, they don't have a memory anyway.
They don't. So memory loss is not such an issue for them, right? You give it to somebody like in their 20s or 30s and you're thinking, well, that might actually cause some damage. If you're like 80, you don't remember anything anyway. Use all the ketamine you want. Doesn't matter to me. I don't have to feed you. Hey, who remembers GABA and glutamate? Anybody heard of those guys? GABA is gamma aminobutyric acid. It's an inhibitory neurotransmitter. Remember we talked about GABA and alcohol and aggressive behavior, right? So GABA, guess what? In this case, we're going to think about, typically if you give somebody a little bit of a GABA agonist, they will have an increase in blood pressure, they'll have an increase in heart rate, right? They'll have a few other things happen. GABA antagonist, sorry. GABA agonist will do the opposite. Glutamate's sort of the opposite story. If you give somebody an excitatory neurotransmitter or an that will make them sort of anxious, right? So a lot of, if you take a drug that will reduce your glutamate or increase your GABA levels, it'll probably reduce some anxiety for you. And then we should talk about these Krebs proteins, right? You don't have to know what that stands for. These are transcription factors that are involved in proteins that are necessary for memory, right? So if you disrupt that Krebs process, you will also disrupt memory, and you're going to prevent the development of condition defeat. So multiple ways here if you want to interfere with sort of the neurochemical or neuroanatomical aspects of condition defeat. So this is great. I mean, we've given you a mechanism now, right? If you are someone who has developed condition defeat, and you can just give yourself a shot of ketamine and fix that. I think about your roller derby squad there. Maybe you guys have unfortunately lost 3 matches in a row. What happens in the next one, right?
Yeah.
You're going to lose because you're just going to like fold. But if you give everybody ketamine before the match, you're really going to lose. But maybe you could try something else. How many of you like that movie, The Natural? Everybody seen that movie, The Natural? No one has seen that film. That's a great film. It's got Robert Redford in it. Captain of Diabetes, Wilford Brimley. Yeah, it's a good movie, actually. Anyway, there's a particular scene in there where the team loses, and they keep losing over and over. And so I think that's like conditioned defeat, right? What happened was I don't know, they ended up just losing. They didn't start winning until one guy died. So spoiler alert, there's a guy on the team that dies because he ran into the outfield fence. And then Robert Redford gets to play. And when Robert Redford gets to play, of course, because he's the star of the movie, they start winning. But before that, they bring in this like sort of motivational speaker, and he goes on and on about how like losing is a disease, and he compares it to like like an STD. It was just kind of it's a particularly funny scene because he's got this real losing is a disease. And he's got this like real slow, sort of drawn out way of saying it. I don't know, Abigail, you should watch it. Nobody else, but I think it's much better than Suicide Squad. I promise you that.
Almost anything would be better than Suicide Squad.
Yeah, that was horrible. Did you look it up, Lauren?
Yeah.
Yeah. It looks like a good movie, right?
I mean, yeah, it looks pretty good. It's got Glenn Close in it, so if you like her.
Yeah, Glenn Close, you can't go wrong, right? And Robert Redford. I mean, geez, guys, what do you guys, This was like when they were both 35 years younger.
Yeah. He looks pretty good in it.
Yeah.
Got the 80s type pants on.
Yeah. No, it clearly is made
Yeah.
in the 80s, right?
Yeah.
It's not set in the 80s, but it's made in the 80s. All right, so this brings us sort of to this idea, like, is losing the new winning, right? It's like everything is the new something, right? Does that ever bother you? Like,
Yes.
I don't know. So anyway, I thought I would throw that up there just to irritate some of you and myself at the same time.
It worked.
I thought so. So is losing the new winning? So I found this. You win, you lose, right? The idea is like, why would we want to lose? Well, we don't necessarily want to lose, right? Although there is some idea, like if you're continually winning, there are some problems as well, right? Because, so here's kind of the downside of winning. Are you ready for that? If you win one of these agonistic encounters, which is pretty awesome, then that's going to make you actually engage in more agonistic encounters, right? But that's going to put you in a stressful situation. And what happens when you're in a stressful situation? Your stress hormones increase, right? And so even if you continuously win, you're going to have elevated stress hormones, right? Because you're going to continuously be in these fights. You're going to try to be in more fights. It's going to keep your sort of stress hormones up. So there may not be like a massive advantage to constantly winning, okay?
Yeah, but it's pretty much the same thing if you lose. If you lose, you will be stressed because you lose.
Yeah. So you got to find that middle ground, right? You got to figure out like how often should I win versus how often I should lose. So I like don't get beaten up too much, but I don't get too stressed out about always winning, right? And so you've got to kind of find that like, just shoot for mediocrity. I don't know if that's a good idea.
You think it works the other way around? Like, you think if you win that it creates conditioned success and you'd be more likely to challenge somebody that you don't have a chance of winning against?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I don't think people look at that a lot. But that's actually a conditioned success. I like that. That sounds like an 80s power investor phrase, conditioned success. Or like one of these gurus is going to come up to you and like, conditioned success, right? But yeah.
Motivational speaker.
Yeah.
Conditioned success.
You should start this, like Montana's conditioned success seminars. For only like $500, you can get the whole weekend package, right? And you can come hear about all of the great ways that you can condition yourself to success. But yeah, absolutely, I think, right? Because every time you win, you get a little bit of dopamine, right? And so fighting's awesome, and you won, and so you're just going to give it a try, right? You're just going to keep trying to take on bigger and bigger opponents, right? I mean, look what happened to Rocky. That's what he did, right? I mean, conditioned success right there, if I've ever seen it in 4 movies. It's the same idea.
But if you keep winning so much, then you eventually don't try as hard the next time.
You think so?
If you're prone to winning.
Maybe. You don't put in the preparation for it?
Like, I mean, like, not the second time.
Yeah.
Like, fourth, fifth.
10 wins down, right?
Yeah.
You're going to go like, oh, I can take all of these guys. They're easy. Yeah. That's what must have been what happened in the first Rocky. That's how he won. The other guy wasn't prepared.
Right.
Like, who's this little guy?
Didn't he just like in the first movie? I haven't watched these in a long time. Didn't he just let the guy like beat him up and like get him tired? Essentially, or am I wrong?
Yeah. And that was also before. That was back when Stallone was just like smelling steroids, not really using them. Because he was still fairly small back then. But he's got like 3 necks now. I saw him in that movie, what was that last movie I saw him in? Guardians of the Galaxy Part 2, Volume 2. And his neck, I mean, it's like he didn't even have a chin. It was just like all neck up to his nose. I was like, man, what is that guy on? And I only want like 1/10 of it because it's like to be able to put my shirts on. I'm not going to be able to get that over my head. And his head's huge too. It's a giant head. Of course, some of that's like cheek implants, but you gotta watch those cheek implants.
Yeah.
They're big now. I mean, his are huge, but generally popular. You guys don't think about those things, do you? No. Nobody, like, increases, this just doesn't happen physiologically. Nobody increases how much muscle they have from the time they're like 35 to the time they're 65. That doesn't work that way. I don't care how much muscle you had when you were 35, when you're 65, you're going to have less. Okay, what you do in between doesn't matter. It's not natural. I think a lot of it's like rubber and foam. I mean, they do. People get like pec implants and all kinds of things, right? It really makes you wonder.
Are those like what people call fillers? Is that what that is?
I'm not, I
Because
guess.
like Courtney Cox just did like a whole thing about how she got hers out because, let's be real, Courtney Cox didn't look right with those in there. But
I don't really like to let people cut around my face. Or any other part of my body for that matter. I get nervous when I get my hair cut. All right, so, is losing the new winning? This really could be an effective coping strategy, right? Let's imagine you really have been beaten a bunch of times. All right, Katie, a bunch of times this happened. You think it's a smart idea to try it again?
Probably not.
Probably not, right? I mean, like, really, why would you put yourself through that? Like, it would be so much easier to just run away. Yeah, it's a little embarrassing, but at least I'm going to keep my teeth. So that's going to be good. So this could be actually a very effective coping strategy. Okay, so they can run away. They can sort of save whatever they have. This is particularly effective if you can find another territory, or if resources aren't that scarce, right? I don't think this takes into account sort of the point of like desperation, right? And I think that's going to be a separate thing to consider. Like how desperate does this animal need to be before they decided they do this math, right? Dina, animals are phenomenal at math, and are constantly making risk assessments. Okay, they are constantly calculating what are the odds that I can win, what are the odds that I can lose, what are the benefits if I win, what are the benefits if I lose, right? And they're always doing this math. And what they will typically do for any particular species, they'll develop, in this case, what they call the evolutionary stable strategy, right? So this is a strategy that a species will evolve over time that works for them. Now there's some variations with individuals within that, right? And that's what, there's this, it's called the hawk and dove game. Hawk and dove, right? And so you have to decide, are you going to be a hawk and attack, or are you going to be a dove and flee, right? And you can apply this sort of framework to any agonistic encounter, right? And then you make the decision. Does this animal stay and fight, or does the animal flee, right? And once you do that math and you decide what is the value of my resources, what are the odds that I'm going to win, what could I lose, and then you decide whether or not it's worth engaging in that, right? Does that make sense? So you can actually work out the math on this if you wanted, and you can use this to predict whether or not two members of a species will fight when they encounter each other, or what one member of that species will attempt to do at least, and then the other one may be on that. So there are some species that are constantly using the dove approach. They'll constantly run away. Okay, and they'll do that if they're able to find other resources, right? So what if somebody came up to your house, Jonna, and they said, "Time for you to move out"? And you're like, "I don't think so." But what if, like, right next door there was an empty house that was even better than your house, and you could have that just by walking over there? Then you'd be like, "Sure, take this one. You know, I'm moving on over to this other house," right? And that's the case in some species. On the other hand, there are some species that you don't have other places you can go, so you're definitely going to try to fight and defend that, right? But on top of that is going to be the sort of individual approach that we've talked about today with conditioned defeat. So you can, individual members of that species, even though in hamsters, I think we would definitely say they're hawks, right? Because we've decided that they're aggressive and they'll constantly attack intruders. But there are times where you can take that hawk and you can turn that individual hawk into a dove by consistently sort of defeating it, right? If for some reason it's a really small hamster. Or a slow hamster, right, Brandon? That's not going to win too many races. So I don't know. So that's kind of interesting, right? So it could be a good strategy. It could be very effective for survival. So that's something to keep in mind. That's why species have the ability to learn and to develop this. I think another thing that's actually kind of interesting about this is that males are more affected by social defeat than females. So at least in hamsters, right? So we can assume this works in a lot of other species as well. The females are more likely to be resilient to social defeat than are the males. So the males will have, they'll have a stronger response to that social defeat than will the females. Sort of interesting if you think about like hierarchies and so forth. Let's see, other fun stuff about conditioned defeat. At least in hamsters, in case you were worried about these hamsters, doesn't seem to affect their sex life too much. I don't know how many of you were thinking about hamster sex lives. All of you are now, but you may not have been before. In some species, there is some evidence that conditioned defeat will decrease sexual performance over time. That happens in fish, rats, some reptiles, things like that. Doesn't seem to be the case in hamsters, although it could, of course, limit your access to mates, right? Might not influence what you do once you are able to interact with one, but it does seem to, does seem like it could limit access, so that could be important. Right, Dean? It makes you wonder, I don't know, sort of like control factors, right? Like what if that's like a control mechanism it's like a culling effect on populations, right? If you're a specific member of your species that's constantly defeated, should you pass your genetic material on to another generation of that species, how effective is that going to be, right? And in furthering your species' domination over the world, which is what all species, even hamsters, are trying to do. I don't know, I think about those things, right? But then I'm really,
So then I'm not surprised you think about those things.
Yeah, well, you never know, right? Because you have to keep hamsters in check. There aren't too many of them. I don't think it really...
Sorry, I was actually thinking the opposite about what you say about social success.
Mm-hmm.
If that's true, that males are more comfortable with social as conditioned success.
Hmm.
That's why they don't take males.
Huh.
Yeah.
Wow. I haven't really taken it there, but that's an interesting thought to incorporate in your paper that you're going to turn in, right?
Mine's about social media,
But
but maybe.
maybe. Okay. Well, somebody else can steal a great idea there, right? Yeah, I don't know. That's sort of interesting, right? Like if you have this conditioned success, how does that? How are we going to study this, Dina? Well, that's not helpful. You're supposed to have an idea ready. I don't know. I'm trying to like think of an artificial situation where you could have someone win. Like, what if you were to? Hey, this might be interesting. What if you were to like rig a game of chance, so that someone will win and then someone will lose, and then like have them do like a number of things that are a game of chance, right? So they have like actual no influence, and then have them do something later that actually they do have influence on, right? And so like see how persistent they are at like solving a puzzle. You know, you give them one of those like Rubik's cubes or something, right? And maybe see how I don't know. That'd be interesting. You could do that. I think you can get that by the IRB. Nobody's interested in that. You just don't. We could all work together on this. Nobody else thinks that's interesting? No, Lauren doesn't at all think that's good. I don't know why.
I just don't want to put the time and effort into it.
You know where that'll get you.
Yep.
When you say no effect in sex life,
Yeah.
do you speak in terms of frequency or duration?
So that's actually a really great question. In other species, I'm just going to put this picture up. In like some species that have been studied, when males have been presented with, that have experienced conditioned defeat, when they've been presented with females, they have shown a lack of interest. They have shown, it's been demonstrated that they have sort of difficulty performing tasks, intromission, ejaculation are delayed or premature. It's really, there are a lot of like performance-related issues. See, you were asking, I'm just going to tell you.
It's okay. I'm just wondering how they measure that.
Yeah, so this is what they will do. They will, if it's in fish, they'll put 2 fish in a tank and they'll go, how long has he been on top of her? And then they'll measure that and go from there.
Question. So you said like premature ejaculation. Is that really like an issue in like animals that don't have sex for pleasure?
That's actually a really deep question.
Yeah, you'd think that'd be adaptive.
Yeah.
Right. Well, as a species, right, there are some species who are obviously much faster than others. And like bonobos, for example. So this is, I think, the great counterexample to your question. Bonobos, for everything we can tell, they do have sex for pleasure. And the reason we know that is they are one of the few species where we've clearly documented homosexual sex, in a species, right? And so there's no reproductive sort of outcome from that, right? So you would imagine that has either some sort of pleasurable and or affiliative component, right? So there's like some like that's strengthening a relationship, right? And then there's not a reproductive element there. But they also have like really rapid sex, right? Like they have like 30 seconds is kind of the average length of time for male-female sex. So I think that, I don't know, that's somebody with a stopwatch could measure that and figure out. I would hesitate to say that others, I would really hesitate to say that we have sex for pleasure and other species don't. That to me would be, again, I think bonobos are a great example of that, although bonobos are very close to us, so you imagine maybe by the time you get down to like hamsters, you think, well, there's not a lot going on there. But I don't think that's to say that their sexual encounters aren't pleasurable. I imagine they would be, or they wouldn't keep doing them.
I want to be more about cats.
I was sitting here thinking about it.
They got all this spiky.
Yeah.
I mean, it's already painful because the males have to hold them down.
Yeah.
And then they have the whole latch hook scenario where the females just can't escape once they're penetrated.
Yeah.
So pre-ejaculation would probably be like a godsend.
Yeah.
I'm just saying.
Yeah, I really want to think
They'd
about
probably
cats.
lower the cat population too, but.
I don't know, right? Because then that cat can move on to another cat sooner.
Yep.
So you gotta worry about that too.
Like I can definitely see where like delayed ejaculation would be an issue because like what if someone comes in and like they get
Yeah.
interrupted, but like if it happens quickly, then you know you're finishing quickly.
I get it. Well, that's kind of an interesting line of thinking. I don't know that anybody's really looked at that. I really don't. Yeah. It's a good one. You can search that on your computer. I'm not going to do it on the one here at work. I always wonder about that, right? Because there are things like, legitimately, I should like type into my computer to look up to talk about it. And I think, well, I don't know. Yeah, I think in general that and that's kind of hard to measure, especially in something that's going to have such a short bout of sex anyway. I mean, I can't imagine hamster sex lasting very long, but I think they would be more focused on intromission as a measure of whether or not conditioned to feed was interfering with sexual performance. Doesn't seem to affect hamsters. Now, it could access is a whole different set of questions, right? What you do once you get access is one thing, but getting access is something else. And a species or a member of a species that's continuously losing is going to lose access to mates typically. Because you're just going to run away, right? It's like if somebody shows up in your territory and you've got a mate there, and you're just like, well, that's not even worth it. Just going to belly up and shuttle out and leave your mate there. So that doesn't seem really conducive to, so, I don't know. You can, I'm sure someone has researched, because they do. I mean, there are, believe it or not, there are people who study like how long different species have sex and measure that time, which is sort of informative in some ways. I always wonder what they tell their parents they do for a living. You ever think about that, Brad? Like these people who watch dolphins have sex. So they call home to their mom and it's like, hey, guess what today? Watch 4 sets of dolphins have sex for a couple hours. Nobody's gonna get into that. Any other questions, Brooke?
So I'm gonna assume that like conditioned fear can like go into learned helplessness. Is there a way to like, or have there been studies to show like to undo that conditioned fear or that learned helplessness?
Yeah, I mean in general, the way to undo conditioned fear is, I mean, what's like the #1 standard approach to somebody who has PTSD? Like exposure therapy, right? I mean, that's a pretty standard approach. It's fairly effective. The hard part is that initial threshold, right? Like if somebody's afraid of clowns, right, which some people are. Brad, you kind of looked over your shoulder like you might be. Like, are there any in here? How do you don't just have like Bozo the Clown show up one day in your office and go like, hey, check this guy, because that's going to really not work, right? So you got to start small and sort of demonstrate that that stimulus is no longer a predictor of a negative outcome. And I think that if you think about the extinction process for animals, like if you continue to like ring a bell and then shock an animal, and then you just keep like ringing a bell continuously, eventually they'll stop responding to that. The problem is that never goes away. Like that's a real problem, right? And so like if someone is afraid of clowns, for example, that fear is never going to really go away. And there's a possibility, like if a clown jumps out and scares them, like they'll just jump right back into being as afraid of clowns as they ever were, that instantly, right? Like that fast. So there's no way that you like unlearn or unforget. It's about changing the weight of that stimulus. Like what is the predictive power of that stimulus? And can I make it predict nothing? And then there you go.
Is that the same for like agnostic situations or not agnostic? And
Agonistic?
yeah, agonistic. Yeah.
I think so, right? So I think over time, if you were to sort of force these animals into agonistic encounters and they were to win, then that would be fine. Or if you were to force them into a situation where it wasn't even an agonistic encounter, but they were just exposed to another hamster over time, they would realize like, oh, that hamster's not going to try to beat me up, and then that would go away. But again, as with anything you've learned to fear, I think pretty quickly you can relapse, right? You can jump back into that. So that's a problem. So here's the moral of the story: don't start losing, ever. And if you already have, we're sorry. Now, that's not a real like optimistic outlook, right? Didn't mean for that to be so sort of down. But the problem is it's just overcoming those. I mean, those neural mechanisms are in place and they're going to stay there, and they're not going to disappear. But you can change the value of that prediction or that predictive stimulus. That's a good question. Anything else? No, nobody's going to ask anything else. That's fine. Oh, right away.
So you said that you posted your whatever we said it was, that
Yeah.
guidelines or whatever we think.
Yeah.
Where is it in Blackboard?
Right in the middle of it.
And then that's what content and then.
Right there. Hold on. I will show you.
I'm saying this because I looked earlier and I didn't see it, so I don't know if we're just screwing up on mine.
I'm going to go with that. I don't know if that's the truth. So, I mean, you just click on course content, exam 2, final project. And if you click on final project, this doesn't look right. Oh, no, that's not what I want. Yeah, so you'll just, I don't recommend writing a submission. I recommend browsing your computer and uploading the file, right? Because if you were going to try to write your submission in here, that'd be problematic, right? This wouldn't work. And if you go to the exam, and you can click begin, look at that. You get questions, and then you can write down answers. It's going to be fun. And then you can just go save all the answers if you want. Isn't that awesome? They were all saved. And then you can get out of this, which is fine. And you can do that. You have, I think I posted it yesterday. I gave you like a full week. So.
Next Wednesday.
Yeah. You have until Wednesday tonight, midnight.
Next Wednesday.
Today's Thursday.
Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, it's due next Wednesday. I believe it's midnight. So there you go. It's not going to be hard, but I do expect probably for each question 6 to 8 pages. 3 to 4 paragraphs. And not like adult paragraphs, but the kind of paragraphs you write. Like adult paragraphs have, I mean, how many sentences do they tell you is in a paragraph? 3 to 5? Yeah, that's if you're in the 3rd grade. And if you're an adult, you write a paragraph with like 8 to 10 sentences, right? Like that's how adults write. And you're not there yet, as a whole. You might be, Lauren, but the rest, as a whole, you're not there. And we're going to get you there by making you write a lot in this class, right? So, like 3 to 4 of your paragraphs is probably accepted. Or like 1 to 2 of like an adult's paragraphs. Right, John? You'll do it. Don't worry about it. Any questions, comments, concerns? We do have stopwatches in the psych office if anybody... We actually do have a number of stopwatches in there. I don't know what they use them for. I don't think it's for that. But there you go.